We had a third speaker, Victor, and Victor, Greg, and I were all state grassland conservationists in our respective states, Tennessee, Indiana, and Ohio. Between the three of us, we had well over 100 years worth of experience, and I was going to call this 100 years worth of grazing knowledge. So you would really walk out of here with your brains just full of information. But we'll talk and have some fun, I hope, because grazing management isn't magic. In my case, I have a pasture fairy. This is my granddaughter, dressed up in her fairy costume. And if you can't see it in front of her, she has her magic wand. She's trying to change those stocker calves into ponies for herself, but never really worked. But those calves would stand still when she was out there. She always made it work well. And it's not spiders and snakes. So I've pulled up a lot of slides over the years. I've always found this one to be interesting. I can't imagine what that guy thought about when he rolled that bale out or up and what it would be like. But if you think about, it's based more on science. Andre Voisin, the French biologist who said matching the plant's need for rest between harvest with the animal's need for high quality feed is what we're trying to do when we're managing pastures. We want to feed the animals with respect to the plant. So if we do that, but I'll tell you, it's nothing new. Wish Gary Lacefield was here. I was going to tell him he's not the oldest man that's thought about this. If you think about this, 1777, a Scottish farmer, agriculturalist, said it'd be great if we could divide our farms up into, they called them parks, and put all your animals in one spot, let them eat the grass, let the rest of the grass rest, then move them to the next place, and let them eat all, and let it grow back. Think about that. 250 years ago. So it's been around a long time. Some of these people have thought about this for a long time. But it's God's great gift, isn't it? Sun, and we have green plants that can take the energy of the sun, convert it into a form that ruminants can take. We can't eat grass and grow well. Ruminants can take that green forage and make meat and milk. In case of sheep, I represent the sheep industry on the GLC. So wool comes from this process as well. And in return, the animals defecate, urinate, put nutrients back into the soil, and feeds the plants again. So it's a cycle. If you think about how all that works, when I get to heaven, I'm going to sit down with Jesus and talk about how this system all really worked. How does this work and why? Understanding all this, because we don't know how all this works. And that's some of the great. I was trained as a soil scientist. My first 8 years with then SCS, before it became NRCS, was as a soil scientist. I mapped soils. I came to the grazing world professionally in NRCS from the soil side. There's not many of us that came to grazing through the soils. But my interest is in soils and understanding soils. But if we think of what is going on in the grazing world, Meredith and some of the speakers yesterday talked about the changing world. We're having less forage acres in the United States and around the world. And it's no surprise that fuel, feed, fertilizer costs are all increasing. There's a tremendous amount of new social concerns, environmentally as well. Wildlife habitat is taking on a role as well in grazing lands or grasslands. Biomass production, we haven't heard as much about it, but several years ago there's a big push to grow forages for biomass and biofuels. And human health. If you ever got a chance to listen to Peter Ballerstad talk about the needs and how forages and forage-based diets and the animals and the benefit that gives to human health. One of my aspects I do on our farm, we sell grass-finished beef. And one of the reasons I do that is because of the marketing concern. There's an interest in my community for grass-grown beef. And it's also that it's local, but there are people that are very excited about the human health benefits of animals that eat just forages. If we look, why are forages important? Because most of the United States is in grass cover. Okay, think about that. And it's a big business. When I talk to my legislators, I talk about this part of agriculture, the business. And it's one of the big crops, if we think about, in terms of corn and soybeans, of course, rules. But that forage production, that's just the hay. Think about if you put the value of the grazed forage into that. Would we exceed corn and soybeans as the most important crop in terms of economically? Now, if we look at forage management overall, there's some bad news. Most of our friends in the grazing world that come to our grazing event, most of the farmers and ranchers aren't using all the knowledge that's available to them. They're not using nearly as much of the technology that's available to them. And I believe in the last few years I've been promoting we need to grow more grass per acre than what we currently are. Remember, as a soil scientist, if you ever read your soil survey, you had predicted yields in the back, forage yields. We're not reaching the potential of our soils with the forage that we're growing now on our fields and on our soil types. Can I say that with corn and soybeans? We'll talk about it. And better harvesting systems. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about mechanical harvest. How do grazers harvest their forage? Yes. So I'll talk about who works for who on your farm. Do you work to feed the animals? Or are the animals are they your employees and you giving them the direction on what should be going on your piece of the world? Then the good news, we have lots of potential to grow more grass, to grow better grass. There's a lot going on in other parts of the world. If you go to Australia, New Zealand, even the United Kingdom or Europe, there's so much going on in the other parts of the world that we could pull from and utilize in this part in the United States. Being from Ohio and the Corn Belt, I want to talk a little bit about this to get you thinking about forage production. I know this is corn, but that's 1930. There's a reason I picked 1930. If you know what this species is, we'll give you a clue of grass up front. But in 1930, the average corn yield in the state of Ohio was 50 bushels an acre. I graduated from The Ohio State University in 1975. That's why I put that up there. The state yield just happened to be 75 bushels in 1975. That happened to be the average on our farm. When I came home and helped Dad harvest that year, was 75 bushels per acre. Look what's happened since then. What has happened to corn? Why has this jumped so much? And I think I got it here this morning. I looked up. Ohio's average corn yield in 2021 is 193 bushels an acre. Think about that. And this was the yes, the world average. That's what this parentheses. In 2011, the world record corn yield per acre was 306. 2017, in 6 years, it went to 504. And now it's over 600 bushels an acre. Think about that.
Do we confuse genetics of corn seed or the betterment of the soil or combination?
It's a combination. It's management. It's management. 1930, Grandpa, my grandfather, could harvest 100 bushels of corn in a 9-hour day. He'd get up early, milk the cows, go out, chuck 50 bushels of corn, unload it, come in for lunch, go back out and do another 50 bushels. My dad always would say, but your uncle and I had to unload that last 50 bushels. Shoveled it off. Today, my brother on that same land can harvest over 100 bushels of shelled corn in 9 minutes. His new machine's probably going to be better than that. Think about the change in the last 80, 90 years. Now, let's go to forages. 1930, the average hay yield in Ohio was 2 tons an acre. I started working, and when I retired, it still was 2,000 acre. Didn't have much impact, Greg, did I? I thought I did there one year when it jumped to 202, 10% increase. Alfalfa, pure stands of alfalfa were 3.4. Ohio hay yield this year was 2.3. We had a real good growing season, you can tell, since corn and hay both utilized the good weather we had in Ohio. Think about that. You saw the growth in corn yield. Why haven't we seen the same thing in forages? And you talked about it, genetics. What's been the change in the genetics of forages in that same time period? What's the #1 selling grass seed in the United States of America? Variety. #1 variety of grass seed that's sold. Kentucky 31, tall fescue. That's a reason that, you know what the 31 stands for, right? 1931 was the year it was started to work with. That was the year it was found on the farm in Kentucky. Think, we have not changed our genetics any, or very, very little on the average farm in Ohio. I'm going to say it's probably pretty true all over. Ohio's not a weak state in producing hay. We're not real big, but we're still in the top 20 of growing hay. Total tons of hay. But we haven't made the same improvements in terms of harvesting it. How did they harvest the forage in a pasture field in 1990? Or in 1930? If I go back through my pasture fields and look, there's a lot of them still continuously grazing. We haven't made the management change that we've done in some of those other crops that we utilize. So I use this to challenge you. That's why I think we could grow so many. The average, I should go back and say the soils, when I was preparing those soil survey reports, our average Ohio soil yield prediction in the soil survey is 3.5 to 3.8 tons per acre. We're not even reaching the potential with common management practices on these soils. So why is that? Why aren't we using it? My farm, I measured the tons. I haven't in the last few years, but in 2005, I was growing 7 tons of forage per acre. And I felt really good. In 2006, went to almost 8 tons per acre. You know what happens when you start getting too boastful, though, Charlie? We had a dry year in 2007, went back to 3, we bounced back to 5.5, 6.5, and then 2012, we got really dry. In our part of the world, if you don't get water at the right times, you don't grow grass. But also put in here is, in the bottom bar graphs here, are the prediction. We talk about forage growth curves. I'm growing a whole lot more grass early in the year, but I'm not doing as well in the fall. And the big change in this is the weather patterns. We used to get more rain in the late summer and fall, and we could grow more grass. Now, I put 2 other counties on there that are doing better in September, as you can see there, than what's predicted. They were getting rains. So it depends a lot on our rainfall patterns. What's that? West Virginia gets the rain. But what happens, some of it is our management. And I don't know if I have any of my Kentucky friends here, but this is 1978. Just putting in 6 pounds of red clover seed in a tall fescue-based pasture, what's your yield? 5.5 tons. I don't know if I got a clicker here. If you don't see a clicker, pointer. But if you look at the, if you don't do anything, what's that yield? 2 tons. What's our average yield? 2 tons. What's most people not doing? Or what are most people doing? Nothing. If you do nothing, we get 2 tons. Yesterday I learned something in this room. Now I understood why most guys don't do nothing. By doing nothing, they get more production from their animal point of view. Because most of people are using what kind of fescue? Which has endophytes, toxins in it. If the plant is weak, which a 2-ton fescue plant is weak, it's not performing, it has low levels of toxins in it. If they start doing management to it and grow more tons of tall fescue, they're also growing more tons of toxins, and their animals do poorer. So think about that. Now, if we would switch to new genetics, do any of these tall fescue plants have toxins in them? Not a one of these do. They all have endophyte, but it's the novel endophyte. This is the new genetics that we can do. We can grow more grass that's better for our animals with some of the new genetics. Now, I don't know if farmers are doing that because they know, or are they just responding to what happens. If they don't fertilize their fescue, the cows don't get sick. The best thing is to move to new genetics. After we do some of these other, it's important to add that legumes to your pasture fields. You provide a lot of characteristics. Think about the price of, this is based on 25 cents a pound nitrogen. What's nitrogen today? It's 50 cents or more. So you can double those prices over there. We can sell you a lot of red clover seed for. And what's newer about some of the newer genetics of some of these legumes, it's not just the plants, it's the rhizobia that are coming with it, can double the amount of nitrogen that's being produced than from some of this older data. So we can do so much more. It doesn't always, and it's not just yield, we can improve performance. Clovers in a pasture field will give you higher rates of gain per animal than using nitrogen fertilizer. Think of it, that's what this is showing. A ½ pound better from using your nitrogen from a legume plant rather than fertilizer. Conception rates. One of the big things in cattle business is making sure the cows are bred. An open cow makes you no money, and she costs you because she still eats. So we want to make sure those cows always have a calf in them. So we think about that. The benefits of legumes are higher yields, improved quality for the animals. It's making nitrogen in our system, growing that. It's a slow release nitrogen, and it improves the summer slump. My world is cool season grasses. Our grasses go dormant or semi-dormant during the summertime. They can't handle the heat. Those legumes in there are much more tolerant to the heat and will keep on growing, and they'll share some of that moisture and keep the grasses cooler and keep them growing longer. So if I can grow more forage per acre, what does that mean on top? I got more growth, but what's it mean underneath? More roots. The more roots I can grow, the healthier my soil becomes. What feeds the microbes in the soil? What's their food source come from? The roots. Actually, it comes ultimately from the sun. The leaves capture the sunlight, make photosynthesis, simple sugars. Those sugars also translocate down into the roots and allow the energy to grow the roots, but they also are leaking that out into the soil, that sugar water, to feed the microbes. The more roots I have, the more microbes I have. And what's organic matter in the soil? Is it just that microbes are also part of the organic matter? I can improve my organic matter content in my soil by having more roots. Now, what's great about a grass plant is the roots don't live forever. Every year that grass plant will shed off half of the roots. So we don't want roots like this. We want roots like these. Think about half of that root mass on the right-hand side dying off, decomposes into the soil. Microbes break it down. It's growing new roots, feeding the energy, the sugar, into those microbes to help that digestive process go on. Which one will have higher organic matters? That overgrazed pasture on the left or a well-managed pasture on the right? So this right one was what we're striving for, to grow more roots. More roots, healthier soils. It's the whole thing. And this isn't new. Greg and I saw this when probably our first week on duty 40 years ago, that we're trying to grow grass. And if we graze it too early, we stunt the plant and we restrict the amount of roots that will be grown the rest of the year. That's old stuff. Old science still works. This one, which grows more organic carbon into the soil, grasses or trees? I can guarantee, well, looking at the age of this crowd, your grandchildren learn in school. Most of your children probably aren't in school anymore. But if you look at this, they're talked about planting trees. When does a tree root die? When the tree dies. Most of the organic in a tree is above the ground. Where does it drop its leaves? In the soil or on the soil? On the soil. Woodlands have most of their organic matter in the top couple inches of soil. The deep, dark, black soils anywhere, but in the United States, are where? Grasslands. You think of you got black soils in Texas, but if you think of the deep black soils of the prairie of Iowa and Illinois, they grew up or developed under deep-rooted grasses. Grasslands can put in twice as much carbon into the soil as trees. Do we tell people this? Do the people know that aren't farmers that grasslands are good at capturing carbon? A good a story we can share. The benefits of oops, that one didn't come up there. There. A biologically active soils, it improves the soil health, soil structure, the tilth. Tilth is that part of the soil, when you open it up, it crumbles in your hands like it does here. It has earthworms moving through it. A lot of excessively tilled soils lack soil tilth and structure. When you till them, they just slabs or clods. If you have clods, you're probably lacking soil tilth. Enhances root growth. We get more roots grow because it takes less energy for them to move through the soil. Better water holding capacity. The water, most of the soil is what? Pore space, air and water. It's not the sand, silt, and clay and organic matter. It's pore space. This crumbly soil has a lot more pore space, holds more water. What did I tell you my most limiting factor on growing forages? Water. If I can hold more water, and that's what I've noticed the last 10 years, we were dry again this year, but I still grew almost 5.5 to 6 tons of forage an acre. And I was as dry as I was in 2007, when I only grew 3.5. Because now I can hold more moisture in the soil. That's the improvement I see. And healthier soils means healthier plants. If you have healthier plants, you have healthier animals. If you're eating healthy animals, what that tends to do for us makes us healthier. It's just a chain effect. If we talked about soil health and whole, and these are the 4 characteristics or management concepts. Disturbing less in our pasture lands, in range lands, we do this well, don't we? You may think, but is an overgrazed pasture disturbed? Yes. Look at your soil test values for organic matter. If your organic matter isn't increasing, you're probably not managing your pasture well. Your organic matter levels should be increasing over time. Otherwise, we're probably overgrazing, not generating enough roots that we could, and we're probably going backwards down that scale. Diversity, having a lot of diversity, not only in plants, but in animals, and also that supports a diversity in the soil. Bacteria and fungi in the soil. We have a big diversity of different microorganisms that are going on there. So we need to feed that livestock in your soil. You realize you have more pounds of animal or life under the surface than you do on the surface. Do you manage that life as well? And keep the soil covered. And that's one of the things we try to do on pasture fields. The more surface cover you have, the more production you're going to have. So in the early 2000s, when I should tell you, my farm, when we bought it in 1984, it was a diverse pasture of tall fescue and multiflora rose. That should be a chuckle there. I don't hear it. If you know those two species. I worked 15 years or so and got it to 45% tall fescue, 15% bluegrass, 10% orchard grass, 18% white clover, 10% red, and 2% forbs. And I thought I was really doing pretty good, because we made a big change if you looked at what it was before to what it was then. And we were doing pretty good. Now, this is a slide I took this spring or summer. That yellow flower is bird's foot trefoil. We have red clover and white clover. There's still the orchard grass, tall fescue. We're converting to some of the novel endophyte tall fescues with time. It also has some of the new and improved bluegrasses, introduced meadow fescue as well. But in the background in that slide, at the top of it is warm season grass. That's switchgrass. In 1985, I planted 5 acres of switchgrass. Now I have switchgrass all over nearly everywhere on the farm. And I only planted the first 5 acres. But it has moved. How? I think it's moved by wildlife. The deer and the rabbits love that switchgrass this time of year when it's full of seed. They get it in their coats. They'll go out in the pasture fields and bed down. And I think that seed gets dispersed. And it's come back. And I don't mind it. I don't manage, in a pasture like it, I don't manage for the warm season grass. I manage for the cool seasons. But the warm seasons are there. And then when the summer comes, the animals will go to that warm season grass and eat. So I get it. Now, we'll talk about some of the downsides. Some of that new genetics are improved digestibility. Some of this new fescue genetics is better feed. Not all tall fescue is the same. I always like working with my cattle friends. I go out and walk their farms, and they talk about the genetics of their cows. And they'll tell me the dams and the sires and 5 linkages back. And we get to the grass, and they don't even know what species of grass they have. They're missing what the cows are eating. They need to understand there's a lot of genetics in our forages, not just the animals out there. So we can utilize some of this new genetics. And it's more profitable because we get better weight gains. Because you're paid for what? You're paid on how pretty your pastures are? How much they grow? Or the animals? You're paid on pounds of beef if you're a cattleman, pounds of lamb if you're a shepherd, pounds of milk if you're milking cows. So we need to look at what's coming off the end. Some of these newer forage plants can get us more pounds of product per acre growing the same tons of dry matter. Understand that? Quality makes a difference in terms of the production. And some of its palatability is intake, and some of it is the fact that it's, when they eat it, they can get more out of it. More of it's digestible. Lower lignin. Cows can't digest lignin. They can digest cellulose, but it's more digestible fiber. Question back here?
Well, I was going to add to what you said, and I totally agree with these comments, but it's also selection as well. I mean, cows are smart. They're selecting the forages that provide their nutrients.
They're going to eat the best stuff first.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they're going to find the best stuff, That's why we'll talk about some of the grazing management here in the next few slides, which make a difference. So this one on just the difference in the pounds or production over time. Some of the newer ones are more productive as well. So multi-species animal grazing can make a difference too. I always have fun because I've always been a shepherd. What's that?
What part of Ohio is that?
That's not part. Not all my slides are from Ohio. That snake didn't come from Ohio either. Sometimes I can pull slides off that I've taken this slide though. But we do have some cedar trees that invade in every now and then. But I always tease my beef guys that you could all be shepherds. Your cows leave enough behind. For every cow, they leave enough behind that it'll support one ewe and her lambs. Okay, and you don't have to change anything. Your cow's not that efficient. Now you can't do that with sheep. I couldn't put a cow on for every ewe I had. Okay, but I got into the cattle business more for my sheep. Because I saw the cows, the beef animals, as giant vacuum cleaners, sucking up parasites that infected my sheep. So we diversified and got some cattle as well. I've not diversified into goats, but they have differences. They defecate differently, they graze differently, they can support the ecological system, the soil microbes differently as well. So this is my ewe flock. We're winter grazing here. You can see the fence. It's not straight. And I work with a lot of people that get, if the fence isn't straight, they have a real hard time with that mental concept. Me, when I was working, the kids had to do this. I told them to move 6 posts, and we just wiggled it down the field. It didn't have to be a straight line because they would follow it. We've changed the genetics of our sheep from what they were before. This is some of the new rams on our farm, a little thicker because they're grazed on grass. So I want lamb carcasses that look like that. Those are grass-finished lamb hanging in the market. I prefer wool sheep because I like my shearer when she comes by every year. This is the one that keeps you guys awake, okay? So when she comes to the farm and shears the sheep, you know, everybody can come around and she gets done. But the cattle were added to improve the pasture fields, and it's made it a little easier because they eat a lot more grass than the sheep do. I can get them to do things that I can't get the sheep to do, and vice versa. The sheep do things the cattle can't do. The sheep will eat a lot more broadleaf weeds. The cattle eat a lot of volume. So if I want to control seed heads in the spring, I can put these girls to work. I'm a fall calver. So we calve our cows out in the fall, so in the springtime, they're at a stage of life they can eat a lot of more mature forages. See if I can click it there. There we're grazing some stockpile early fall. That's one of the things we do. The other one we do is targeted grazing. I represent the American sheep industry. This is the old targeted grazing book. We're looking at ways we can use small ruminants and other animals, and doesn't have to be small, of managing the animals to get a targeted benefit to the environment. Western countries, they look at using grazing animals to reduce fire fuel loads around cities. We use it for weed control, vegetation management in the East. One of the big ones now is grazing solar farms. They put the panels in. They like small ruminants to come in there. Otherwise, they have to pay people to come in there and mow that. Sheep are workers that don't charge, and they're not unionized yet, so they can keep it work. And they'll pay me to graze there, so it's my next thing of looking at. Targeted grazing. So this is a picture of a farmstead. The sheep, I don't know if you can see them, they're not out there. They're just targeted grazing there. So they did get out. Once you opened the door, they ran from back. But I put this picture in here. This is one my wife took this about a month ago or two. They did get out, and they were targeted grazing the front lawn, so I didn't have to mow it. But it was nothing new. Woodrow Wilson used his sheep when he was president to manage to mow the grass at the White House. Didn't hire anybody to mow it. He had his flock of Shropshire sheep out there managing the vegetation around the White House. If we look at grazing management, that harvesting is the utilization of the forages. It's based on how long they're in the spot and how many of them are there, the density. We can manage that as grazers, as grassland managers. We determine how long they're going to be there and how many of them there'll be. Because overgrazing is a function of time, not the number of animals. It's how long they're in a given spot. So this is a stocking rate of 40,000 pounds. We have found that that's kind of the magic number. If you're not at 40,000 pounds, you're probably not going to see a big drastic change in your plant communities and what happens to your pasture field. You got to get close to this 40,000 pound mark. And Greg's seen, he's probably at a higher stocking rate most of the time on his farm. But we can see when you get to that 100,000 pounds, 2.5 times this, you have a bigger impact on what happens to the soils and the plants. When we put them at this level, they stop selective grazing, the one question somebody asked. Here, they're going to eat it. I grew up in a house with 2 brothers. The potatoes never went around the table twice, okay? Because you ate it just because you didn't want your brother to have it. That's what happens here. These cows eat it just because they don't want their sister to have it. And they won't care if it tastes good or not. They're eating because they're hungry. And they know they're going to be there until you move them again. So they soon learn, you change their grazing behavior, their grazing management. If we look at how you manage that, just a simple math. Sometimes these are bigger than my cows, so I used to make math simple for me. 20 cows, 1,500 pound cows, that's 30,000 pounds of animal, right? They're going to eat around 3% of their body weight, 900 pounds. Adding a grazing efficiency of 70%, you need to offer them more than what they're going to eat. So it's around 1,285 pounds. If I had a pasture that's 900 pounds, or 9 inches tall, 9 times 300 gives me that 2,700 pounds of forage out there. So if I average that out to 1,300 pounds, it's real close. I want to leave 1,400 pounds. Now, I'm into grazing tall. In the summertime, I have a minimum of 1,600 pounds out there. I try to leave more residual than I did in the past. One of the things, I think we can capture more sunlight and maintain that root mass, keep the soil cooler because I have more shade on it with more leaf area, so we leave more behind. But so that 1 acre will feed that 20 cows for one day. And that gets me close to that that's at 30,000 pounds. Okay. Do you know the weight of your cows? Because we feed cows by how big they are, how much they weigh. What's the typical cow weigh? I tease my friends at the university all the time. They talk about 1,200 pound cows. When you weigh their cows at the university, they're closer to 1,700 pounds now. We had that talk in here yesterday, university cows, I think they called them. Big, big cows. My cows are under 1,200 pounds. Yes. Well, now our average Angus is bigger than the Charolais was when we introduced them. So, the implications for grazing management, these are those key things. Heavy stocking rates for short periods of time will change their grazing management and how those animals graze, their foraging behavior. And manages the biodiversity, changes it. Yes?
Quick question, so if you start out with heavy intensity grazing for a period of time, and you change their grazing behavior, you put them back into a larger pasture after a period of time, will they stay with that changed behavior?
For a period of time, yes. It takes about a week to 10 days to adapt, just like changing feed. So you're not, once I pin them up tight, they're not going to behave. It takes them a week to learn how to get socialized again, okay? And it's kind of like taking a pumpkin or country pumpkin and bringing him into town. It takes me a week to learn how to socialize. So once the cows are the same way and we reverse it, they'll stay bunched up for a while, but not necessarily. Once they'll soon unlearn that.
I think that the animals will change the preferences. They'll still prefer the same thing. When you walk up, it changes the behavior. So when you move them back up, you go out there and try to pick the best one of the grass. Right.
But you've changed there.
You know, so their preferences really haven't changed, but their behavior does.
Yes.
And that's manageable.
Now, Kathy Voth, if you ever learned, she teaches you how to teach cows to eat weeds. You can teach them because a lot of that is a learned behavior. So once they've learned they can eat that plant, they will continue to eat it. It may not be their first choice. Depends how many choices you give them. So if you give them more choices, they still may pick their favorite, but they'll still go ahead and eat that. If the problem comes, you have to keep them there too long if you give them a big area. And you really don't want to stay there that long. Like I said, overgrazing is a function of time, not how many animals. The longer they're in a given spot, the more likely you are to overgraze. What mama does. So you can change their behavior long term with that. That's one of the things we did in Ohio was we did a GLC grant. We looked at some of how we managed the pasture fields. We looked at good farms that were doing a real good job. It's the middle comment I wanted you to get to look at. We went to their pasture fields, measured, pulled soil samples, if you will, from the areas of high concentration to low concentration, then picked a spot in the middle. So we got 3 soil samples from the same paddock or pasture field. Looking at that, what we found is that 2/3 of the high sample areas show no need for P&K fertilizer. Okay, but on the bottom end of that, in the low area, 2/3 of the low sample of the low areas would show a plant response to additional P&K fertilizer. And these are good managed farms that are doing rotational grazing. So what we've done, I've seen this on my own work as a consultant. We've sampled farms, grid sampled pasture grazing farms. I've saved some customers between $4,000 and $8,000 a year in fertilizer bill by not fertilizing those high areas anymore.
What do you mean again by high and low?
Well, we went to their farms, went to the pasture grazing paddock. We picked the high area would be an area where the animals concentrated, spent a lot of time. A water source, a hay feeding area, or if whatever they may be doing, where the animals would have defecated, urinated. Usually it was close to an area of watering or feed. The low one would probably be the farthest from that point, where they didn't graze as hard. And then we picked a point halfway in between. So we looked at the mediums as well. But it makes a difference. Also got us to look at water quality issues. Where is that point of high P&K? So in Ohio, we have this thing called Lake Erie on the northern side, and water quality is a big issue. They look at reducing the amount of phosphorus going into that body of water. Some of our pasture fields had higher phosphorus levels than the crop fields in northwest Ohio. Understand? We have some potential environmental problems in some of those areas, especially if those areas were close to a drainage area, a stream, on our intermittent waterway. Because that phosphorus, we have found soluble phosphorus leaving fields, not just particular phosphorus. So what we learn, if you see these kind of areas in your field, you may have a fertility issue. If your cows are making an impact like that, you probably have some deficits around, okay? So one of the things we've learned is, in terms of grazing management, if we can move, more often we move, the better distribution of manure we get, and we have fewer of those high and low spots. We kind of supplement it out. If we're feeding, we want to supplement the pasture. We don't use pasture to supplement the concentrated feed. I do this with dairy. Lots of dairies like to do this. They supplement their TMR with pasture. And it ought to be the reverse. Know what you're feeding out in the pasture field, then supplement that. Us beef and sheep guys, we do that with forage, with hay. When the pastures are slow, we tend to feed our supplemental feed. We really don't change the feed. But in dairies, they tend to do it the other way sometimes. Some of the other things we have done on our farm is utilizing annual crops. This is a beef cattle going into a stand of oats. I do that when I want to make a switch, renovate. So we'll go in and put a smother crop of oats, and we'll come in here and graze the oats out, then come back in the following spring and establish a new forage stand or change the base. We've used turnips in terms as yes, directly into it. That's the plan. Okay. Depends how much regrowth we get back and how good a job of the oat stand. This is a really good oat stand. It's going to smother a lot of things out. Yes, we graze the oats out, so there's very little residue carry over. Turnips are the same way, they carry on.
And the idea is no-till, not direct plow, correct?
Correct. Disturbance. I want as little disturbance as possible. Okay. So we try to use as little disturbance so to maintain as much of that carbon in the soil that's there and still do my job of getting the seed established. Summer annuals, we're doing more with sorghum Sudan grass for the cattle. They do really well on it. It's a similar process. I learned this, I guess. If you go to the south, they plant cool season grasses in their warm season based pasture fields for the winter time. Our dormant time is the summer, so I plant warm season annuals into my cool season pastures to get more production out of them. Grow more grass per acre. And that's done really well. My grass-fed beef love this. I've weighed, when the first couple years we've done it, we got over 4 pounds a day growth on them. Really good, okay? My beef all gets slaughtered before they're 2 years old. And they're usually finished at that time. But what we've done in this, we've made our diversity as well. It's not just straight sorghum Sudan grass. We've added a cowpea, a warm season grass legume. We've added a forb, Behrenberg's T-Raptor, which is a hybrid sorghum or hybrid brassica. Grows tall. They all grow tall together. And the cows, now the cowpea has not grown back from me after the first grazing. The brassica depends on the temperature. If it's really hot, it does not grow back as well as the BMR sorghum Sudan grass. The other one I talked a little bit about, we established that switchgrass, and I like the switchgrass because it's a short window, gives me a lot more, another way of establishing or handling the summer slump. So it can carry a lot of animals on a small area for a period of time. Now the window's kind of short. That's why I kind of like seeing it move across the farm, because it allows my cool season pastures to have some of this warm season grass out there as well. What I found though is I can't stockpile nearly as much. Oh, this is the slide. So since I have more diversity, what's the best plant to stockpile? In Ohio is this stuff, tall fescue. As I've reduced the amount of tall fescue in my forage base or stands, my stockpiling amount is reduced as well. So we don't get as much, but our cows are out 365. I supplement my pasture with hay bales. I've already determined how much hay I'm going to need on a typical winter. If it gets worse, I may need more. But I know how much pasture I have out there. And I know how much they're going to eat for the most part. So we do a lot of this. We do a lot of bale grazing as well and get them around. This is what an aerial view of a bale grazing will look like as we move around the farm. And by springtime, if it's not too bad, those will all green up. In 2 years, the areas where we fed are the best. I never feed a bale in the same place twice. So the rings are moved with every bale. And as we go around the second time, we'll split the middles. So I'll never put a bale, try not to put the bale. I suppose eventually I live long enough, I will put a bale in the same spot twice. That's where the bale actually sat. Yeah, no, that's where the ring was. Oh, the center of the field? That's a catch pin for the calves to go in? Okay. And they can run in there. That's really good stuff in there. So they go in there, get away from mom for a little while, eat a little better. So creep grazing. Okay. My whole goal of winter grazing and stock is this: to get those manure urine patches scattered all over the farm in a uniform pattern across the field. You can see the round bales are there in the distance at the top of the slide. There's cows down there too. But we want them to defecate and leave their pies uniformly across the whole field. So to me, I thought, somebody else talked about yesterday, their phone was full of pictures of cow pies. My phone isn't full, but I keep those. The other thing we do use is a feed pad from time to time. This is just a gravel, or a surfaced area that if we get really, really muddy, we can lock them down for a few days. If I wanted to live with this is an old slide I've used for many, many years. Managed grazing creates a healthy pasture with a canopy of good grass, a thick, deep root system to hold the soil and make it healthy. That's the whole purpose of this talk, was to, if you can grow good, healthy grass, you're going to have good, healthy soil and make it work. And if we have good, tall grass, the tall canopy, runoff is really reduced. That's why I say when we graze it too short, we can get runoff and erosion can occur. Okay. So I leave it with this. Grass is the forgiveness of nature, her constant benediction. Its tenacious fibers hold the earth in its place and prevent its soluble components from washing into the sea. It invades the solitude of deserts, climbs inaccessible slopes and forbidden pinnacles, modifies climates, and determines the history, character, and destiny of nations. Grass yields no fruit in the air or in the earth, yet should its harvest fail for a single year, famine would depopulate the world. 1872. Sometimes I feel we're at that same spot. So, there. You ready, Greg?
Well, SCS I started with, and then we went to NRCS, but I've been with them for about 40 years. I retired in 2018. I'm a grazing consultant like Bob, and I also have farmed about that same amount of time or longer. So even without Victor, we have about 80 years of grazing experience, and you learn a lot from everything, from what you do and see, and we go on a lot of farms. I can't tell you how many farms I've been on, but we learn a lot from those other people, and some of what I've learned is in here, especially when we get to gate arrangements and things like that. We'll see that. This picture here was taken about a year ago this time of year. I have similar pasture this year. I have some that is even better than this was, and this is where we had the irregular fence, Bob, and we just gave them about 5 feet, 10 feet a day, and there's some hay. They're back grazing back to water. Yeah, so I run a grazing operation with my partner, Debbie Apple, and she's back here knitting. She's a wool person like Bob, and she has a fiber room with looms and spinning wheels, and their operation, her son, Braden, runs a dairy, and so we've got a diverse operation, but somehow we keep it simple, and we run it just with 3 people. We have a lot of interns, and we do plan to hire another employee. But that's where we're grazing some cattle and sheep together. The great thing about running sheep with cattle is that it looks like you got a lot of calves out there. So there's some goats. I had 300 nannies at one time and got tired of them, and but then the browse came back, right? The blackberries and multiflora and stuff, and so we brought the goats back mainly for weed control. Now in this picture they're in with some wool sheep, Debbie's wool sheep, and we were just breaking them in a little more to the electric fence at this point. We can keep them in with 2 wires now, 2 hot wires. Something I've found in seeding pastures that I thought, well, let's add some diversity to the pasture. Let's add some cucurbits. We haven't done that. Let's, diversity in soils. Well, we can grow zucchini out in the pasture and none of the animals eat it. But, if there was hogs in there, I'm sure they would. And we do have some hogs. We also have chickens, broilers, and layers, and we'll move those around the farm. Have to move those pretty often or they'll denude the area. In this case, they're in a cotton trailer. We also have some hogs. They're very destructive, but we're using them for silvopasture, converting some woodland over to a silvopasture, and we're wanting some disturbance in that case, and we're opening up more and more for shade. I seeded some behind. I used to seed a perennial behind them of something like orchard grass and prairie brome and some of the legumes. Now I've gone more to annuals because they are so destructive. You might as well just have an annual. But here they all lined up for a bath. I can spray the sprinkler out there, and they're like little kids playing in the water, the sprinkler. Here's where how I used to do the sheep mineral. The old literature was don't let the sheep have the high copper sheep mineral. Well, now we just feed the cattle mineral along with, so everybody gets the cattle mineral, and it's about 1,900 part per million copper. I have some friends that are feeding 7,200 part per million copper to sheep, and they haven't died in about 2 years. So as in grazing management, like Bob said, we're kind of on the edge of things, and we're pushing the envelope a little bit. I'm not saying to go home and change over to 7,200 part per million copper, but that's a technique to use. You can use a hot wire, and the sheep and goats can get to it, and the cattle can't. So if we want to feed a high dollar sheep mineral, we'll do something like that. That's a catch-em mineral feeder for sheep, and it's really, I like it. I have an annual pasture walk that was mentioned, and we've been doing this for over 20 years. And this coming year, it's always the 3rd Thursday in October. It used to be on a Friday, but a lot of people come out, and we just have a conversation about what's going on. It's easier to criticize your place than somebody else's, so it's a time for people to come together and just have that discussion. Yeah, so looking at some of the fundamentals, I used to think, let's just manage the grazing height and everything's going to work out. It's not a single variable world. And I'll show some more pictures of different fertility regimes. But if you don't have the balanced fertility and you don't have the plant community, managing the grazing height's not going to help you much. It'll help a little. But I would say in that case, let's manure it somehow if you're regenerative minded and don't want to buy inorganic fertilizer. So anyway, let's balance that fertility. I hadn't fertilized in, I think it's going on 15 or 16 years now, but I do soil test, and I still think even if you're not going to buy fertilizer, it's real important to soil test to know where to feed hay, to know how to do the rotation, rotate from good to poor pasture, and you've moved some fertility in the animal. I'll hold up a little bit on the fertility stuff. And then the next thing, if there's just two things I wanted to talk about, it'd be balance the fertility and the grazing height, the cover. But we want to continuously feed the below ground herd too, and the soil. And so let's have good feed consumption. We'll get into that a little more. And then I'm going to discuss paddock layout, water distribution, and rationing grass. But the big thing is no bare ground. So we do some seeding. We don't want to see the soil. There we are, just moving down a county road, and you can see the dogs with the sheep there. Bob showed a rainfall simulator, and here's another one. It's just amazing. We can create miracles. We really can. We have so much control of the land and the water. We have so much control. It's almost scary how much control. This is the same soil type with different covers, and it's very predictable. More cover, less runoff, less flooding. More cover, more infiltration. More water, less droughts. So we have lots of control, and so it's very important we keep the land covered. So just jumping, just in case that I don't get to everything, and we do want to leave 10, 15 minutes at the end for questions. I wanted to go ahead and jump into this. If you go to the doctor, and you don't want him to just keep you where you can walk. You want to run, you want to be at your top performance. So I think we need to think in ideals and then back it down to reality. So let's maintain that leaf area. Let's capture the sunlight. That's carbon. And that you can direct that carbon to carbohydrates, to organic matter, to energy. But if you don't, it's lost. It's a flow, it's not a cycle. So once you capture it, you can kind of cycle it a little bit, but you'll lose that carbon if you don't capture it. So I'd like to graze paddocks 3 days or less. In general, we're rotating about every 2 days. Don't allow them to take a second bite. In general, we say, rotate every 4 days or so because they'll back graze. As long as you're offering something better, they're going to keep going forward. Be observant, watch and see if they go back. Then you need to do some back fencing. The recovery time varies a whole lot. I'm from a rainfall area of about 70 inches. Tropical is 60 inches. We're on the Kentucky-Tennessee line. We get lots of water. And it's well distributed. We'll get 3 to 4 inches every month. That's historic averages. Now we'll have some dry spells. I don't call them droughts because they're only 3 months at the worst. So I like to have 3 months of forage stockpiled all the time. Keep light to the desirable plant. And we could turn that around. Let's shade the undesirables. The undesirables reaching for light through the green forage. It's more succulent, more vegetative, more palatable. don't let desired species go to seed. That's a little more minor, but still keep it vegetative. Tromp that excess forage, get it down on the ground where we got that carbon on the ground, and that would come with the high density grazing. This one's a little question. If you're doing high density, short duration grazing, this one's not so important, but periodically, if somebody's doing lesser management, they may periodically want to graze pretty darn hard and then give it 3 times the recovery that you would give it normally. And you'll get a bounce back. Now, if you're grazed like this carpet and you get off of it for 2 months, you're going to say, well, this doesn't work. I'm not getting any growth. It's because your yields are so low from not having any leaf area or roots, that you're just not going to get a response. So you've got to maintain that leaf area. All right, some other considerations. When I walk in a field, the first thing I think is, does this need grazing, or could it wait a little longer? Does it need a little longer recovery, and would it benefit it? Again, keep it vegetative. Talked about keeping light to the desirable community or key plants, like if you have fescue orchard grass, it'd be orchard grass if you want to sustain orchard grass. Stockpile and reserve paddocks for drought. We know drought's coming, or dry spells are coming, and winter's coming. We know that's coming. Another thing to think about is this grass going to serve me better today, or is it going to serve me better when those calves drop? Maybe I need to hold this grass all the way till March, even though I could graze it today. So we need to always have that in consideration. And then the sacrifice area. I don't like having to go to a sacrifice area, but I'm stocked pretty heavy. It changes all the time. There's very dynamic, my land base. I just took over 120 acres of my brother's. I have another 60 acres coming in. But prior to that, I was at 1.3 acres per animal unit, and that's a high stocking rate. The good thing about it is it gave me some experience of, can I still manage grass well with a high stocking rate? And yes, you can. You just respect those minimum heights. Don't take it below that minimum height. In general, I might graze 20% below the minimum height to protect the greater 80% of the pastures. But always stockpile that sacrifice area. I feed hay in the fall. So I feed hay when I can grow more grass. It's kind of counterintuitive. Why would you do that when you've got grass this tall? Or like this? You know, but if you're feeding in January in my area, you're not growing any grass. When I'm feeding in September, I'm growing grass. And you can multiply your acreage out. If you're on a small acreage when you're feeding hay, you're growing grass on 90%. If I'm feeding in the woods, which I don't normally do, but I have done, you're growing grass on 100%. So something to consider. How many paddocks do we need? We'll look at that a little more. All right, so analyzing the soil, I'm going to go fast, so kind of buckle up here, and if you really want to get into the reading of it, you may want to take a picture of some of the slides. But of course, the soil test is the chemical aspect, physical aspect. Web soil survey is wonderful. Just Google web soil survey, and it's pretty intuitive on pulling up soil types, and like Bob was mentioning, the soil potential. And then biological is the one that we're just now really delving into, looking at the soil life. And the soil structure is kind of physical, but really it goes right along with the biology. It's how I read the biology. If we have great soil structure, we're going to have the biology there. And we'll look at that a little more. On my website, it's gregbrann.com. It has some indicator plants. It's under resources. And we see the buttercup, and it's just a strong indicator that it's been grazed too close. You should not have to spray buttercup or spray anything multiple years. I understand spraying it to get it under control, but with management, we can outcompete these weeds. the picture here on the right, that's a picture taken, I don't know, probably 8 years ago. No, it'll be about 5 years ago. And buttercup's under that fence row because I used Roundup the year before. We hadn't sprayed anything in 3 years, even on fence rows. Those are chestnuts planted. And then that corner up there where the buttercup it's a triangular paddock, and that's near water. So it's compacted up there. It's got more, there's less cover, less competition. So the buttercup comes in. Now on my place, buttercup's not a bad weed. I don't want a lot of it, but sheep eat it. So that's the balance there. But these other species listed are strong indicators too of compaction. They're trying to heal the land. Like take the curly dock. It has a root as long as my arm, about as big around as my thumb. It's really working on that, and you'll find it in wet areas. And what they have in common with wet areas is compacted soil has low oxygen. So it's a similar plant community. Indicator plants of low fertility. Boy, this picture here, you see red sorrel and daisies, your fertility is way out of whack as far as production. Now, it's a real interesting area for diversity in plants, but it's not going to be productive, and the animals are not going to like these species. Rabbit tobacco, you just know it's out of whack. We have to have a soil test to tell you what element's missing, like if it's phosphorus or pH, but these are strong indicators. This is a Jim Garish slide, and it's just showing that hay is an extractive process. It's removing nutrients. I buy my hay as well and bring it in. You have to be watchful because, yeah, you could be bringing in some weeds, and you don't know the quality all that well, but you could forage test. But the big thing is maturity. If it was cut early, if in our area, hay's cut in the spring mainly, so if it was cut early like May, it's going to be decent quality. I don't care what the species is, it's going to be higher quality if it's vegetative. So you can see there's lots of nutrients in the hay, and it's a lot of removal. So, and this is some unrolling hay. We have some terrain on our place, so we don't have to have an unroller other than a person to push it, or you can push it with the spear if you'd like. But it is a daily activity. Right now I don't have any help, so I'm bale grazing because I can set them out easier, and I want to put my time into something else. Whatever you focus on, you're going to accomplish. That's just another saying now. But you want them to clean up most of that hay when you unroll it. This is maybe a little excessive, but we get excited when there's snow because we rarely have snow. We had 12 to 18 inches of snow. So, and the great thing about unrolling is they can't defend the unrolled hay. So a big cow can't keep the sheep off. If I bring in a roll of hay and I set it down, there'd probably be sheep all around it. Within 10 minutes, no sheep around it. So you got to be observant. They're the bottom of the pecking order. So what we would do is we'd bring in the cow hay first, and then we'd bring in the better hay second, and now the sheep get the better hay because the cows go to the other. But with unrolling, you don't have to be concerned about that so much.
So once you start putting hay out, do you try to move the hay to different pastures and continue?
Yeah, it would be, usually it's going to be the low fertility pasture. Like I'll know because I soil test fairly often, every 3 to 5 years. Now it's pretty stable and everything's in the medium-high range, which is where I want it to be. But if I had a low fertility field, then that's where it would go. And it would almost all go there, but usually you need to feed on at least 20% of your farm. So
basically, once you put the hay out, you really stop rotating your cattle, and they basically camp out in that area, or do you? I
like to rotate the pasture. I keep the rotation going. once it's soiled, that's my biggest thing. Once it's all been walked on, laid on, manured on, I want to move them. Even if it's hay, and I like to maintain some grazing height because I get excited when the weather forecast says 59 degrees. If it's 59 degrees for 3 days or more, you're going to get growth if you have leaf area. But if you don't have leaf area, so I try to keep 4 inches of growth or more on all of the pastures. Doesn't mean I do. I get down to 2 inches sometime, but last year I experienced a real miracle where I kept the 4 inches of growth. So that's kind of a new thing. I used to just take it on down to 2 inches in the dormant time. But that, if you really, of course we need the grazing more in the winter than we do in spring, but if you want to boom a field, feed on it, let it grow back to 4 inches, and then don't graze it till April or so. In my area.
Greg, you had a comment on the previous slide I was going to ask you about. Could you back up?
Yeah. Try to. Oh yeah, on the hay harvest. Yeah, so you know we grow this beautiful forage and it's up there and it's like this and everybody says you ought to cut that for hay. And I have, but we don't bring in nutrients other than feeding hay. It set back my production 3 to 5 years because I removed it. Now, if you feed it, unrolled it on the same field, then you're going to cycle about 80% of it. So it wouldn't set it back so much. But if you're bringing that hay off to other fields, you can really set back your yields.
Versus graze harvesting.
Right. Yeah, the graze harvesting. Well, here's something else is I've discussed this with the university fertility specialist, and he's retired now, Hugh Savoy, but I said, why aren't you giving some credit for the manure? Because I put a lot of focus on manure, and you'll see some values in a minute. But he said, well, normally the way people manage, only 10% hits the pasture. And so he's right. And so that's why their recommendation doesn't take into consideration the manure. Of course, it doesn't test the organic fraction either, so it's kind of missed in another way. But with good grazing management, we can get up to 80% of it to hit the field, the manure and urine. And Bob mentioned the feed pad, and you know, if I had one, I would probably use it about 2 weeks out of the year. The thing about a feed pad is, we humans, we see something, we captured that manure. Well, I want them to spread it out, you know. But the manure itself only has mainly phosphorus in it, whereas the urine has the nitrogen and the potassium in it. So we didn't capture that unless we had a lot of hay waste to absorb it. So there's even more value in the grazing management than there is in captured in a feed pad. And then the cost of spreading it and all, it just doesn't make sense, economic sense. I think I've covered that enough. Yeah, so the pictures I'll talk about first. That's a picture of a tunneler next to the cow piles there. That's not an excellent cow pile. That's showing a little fiber in that cow pile. I'd rather it be a little more liquid and look like a pumpkin pie. Over on the right, we're seeing some goat or sheep pellets, probably goat pellets. That's like throwing fertilizer out of a bag. They eat a multiflora rose and then they defecate on the surface. You've just cycled a nutrient that was totally lost. I've seen the biggest impact from goat grazing, introducing goats into the cattle operation than I did with sheep coming in. As far as fertility, gains per acre, sheep are way ahead. And so, but the goats can really change the dynamics of the fertility. I'm not going to go through these numbers, but the bottom line is that you can give all of the nutrients needed to your pasture in about 5 days of grazing if you're grazing 100 head per acre, 100 animal units. So just 5 days. It doesn't have to be continuous. It could any time during the year. If you could fertilize a corn crop, just grazing it 11 days with 100 cows per acre. So there's a lot of value in the nutrients of the manure. Don't treat it as waste unless it's fallen in a place it shouldn't fall. I'm not going to go through these numbers either, but the value of doing what Bob was talking about with his bale grazing is 10 times higher than the cost of seeding those areas. And I doubled the area to seed because it's hard to seed just the bale area. So 10 times the value, pretty important. 95% of what's needed for the plant to grow is just coming out of the air. Nitrogen, very abundant, carbon, very abundant, water in our area, and then the sunlight, capturing that sunlight. Something I like to do is stick a straight edge down in this grass, and I'll count the number of leaves I touch. Like on this, I would have to dig to see exactly, but I'm hitting about 6 or 7. And in order to capture the most sunlight, we need 7 to 11 layers of grass, and that's what we're after. To really evaluate your soil, pull this grass back, and then you want to look at the soil, and you'd like to see a residue cover there. If you've rested a long time, they may have eaten up that residue, but you want it to be tilled up by the soil life, and you'll see the earthworm castings, and they're 5 times higher fertility than the surrounding soil. So there's real value in a long recovery. One thing though, and it took me a while nobody ever told me this, I just experienced it, is when you're tall grazing, and I love tall grazing, top third grazing is my favorite form of grazing, but your plants will be spaced further apart. You've got real strong plants, but there are not as many of them, it's not as thick, so we'll kind of shake it up and not just do top third grazing, we'll do some mid grazing too. Jim Garish slide, just showing if you graze or clip to 2 inches, it takes 64 days to grow a ton of grass. If you're at 4 inches, it only took 40 days. That's a 37% increase in production just by managing height. Incredible. I'm going to skip that slide. So the multi-species grazing, why would we add sheep? You know, we're going to need better fencing. Why would you do that? Now in this picture, I think I had some goats in there too. But weed control is the first one we think of, and then the nutrient cycling. The spot grazing, cattle won't graze next to their manure, but the sheep will graze right where the cattle manure was. So you won't have that spot graze, a lot more uniform growth. And then hay savings, the sheep won't eat hay unless they're out of grass. In fact, that's something you have to learn, is you don't keep managing like cattle grazing when you go to sheep, because they'll overgraze the whole farm. Don't just keep rotating them. With cattle, we can kind of do that, but with the sheep, you got to watch it, in other words. Now, this is Idaho State, I believe, was the research that showed you could up meat production by 24% adding sheep to a cattle operation. But when you added cattle to a sheep operation, it only upped production 9%. So sheep are very efficient. They're the most efficient grazing animal I'm aware of. So they can really add. And what we've gone to now, I've decreased my sheep numbers, and I'm managing, because I got tired of multi-polywire. So we were using 3 strands of polywire to control the sheep, because I had 300 ewes at one time. And so now we're just managing the cattle grazing with 1 wire, and the sheep are able to forward graze. In this case, doing that technique, we're a little concerned that the sheep are going to get too fat and not breed as well. So sometimes we'll pull the sheep out and put them on a little lesser forage for certain periods. Yeah, so what's the ratio? You know, what should you run? I like an even ratio of numbers of cattle or even in animal units to sheep and goats and cattle, but what's out there is the main thing. Inventory the plants that you have and make sure, like a goat will eat grass, but it doesn't want to eat grass. So if that's all you have, that's what it'll eat. The sheep, they're a lot like little cows. I would never say that about a goat. And then the cattle will walk off into dense vegetation where sheep and goats will edge it because they're prey species. They don't want to be vulnerable. So this is a picture of my cattle corral, but it works wonderful, and it's the design I go to every time now for any species. It's an alley all the way around that spirals into the head gate, and then the head gate faces 3 paddocks, 3 pens, and those pens can be turned back into that outside alley. And then I'd use that Canadian sorting technique where you have 2 alleys and you stand and you can sort the calves from the cows. That works excellent. So this is a wonderful layout. But introducing new species, we want to break them to hot wire number 1. So we'll have an offset hot wire, say in a corral like this, and they get broke into hot wire, but also they're running beside the other species. Let's say it's sheep coming and there's cows already there. Then the dogs are the hardest thing to introduce to the cattle, and they have to bark up and down the fence line. The cows are also interested in what's new. Anyway, you do that for a little while, and then I like to turn them into a big field, and that way they can get away from each other if they want to. They just learn that it's okay. I had a buddy turn out some llamas one time with his cows, and the cows ended up about 3-4 farms away. So they thought some dinosaurs had been released. That's just a picture of some of the sheep in a polywire fence that we used to use, and a little brace there, and that's Johnson grass and Bermuda grass and fescue and orchard grass and clovers. So soil life, there's more life in the underground than there is above ground, and that's counting the weight of the cow. So it's really interesting that Ed Rabin put this slide together, I believe. My quick thought on soil health is there's carbon coatings on the aggregates. And if we don't feed the soil with residue and roots and don't keep that soil life fed, and there's not enough carbon, they'll eat the coating on that aggregate and the soil will collapse. And if it collapses, you don't have pore space, and that's the whole structure and the air and water storage. Now it'll rebound pretty fast if we give carbon back pretty quick, but it's a real concern. Pete? Yeah, we have quite a few dung beetles. I'd like to see more, but we have mainly dwellers, just in the pie. And there must be a different dung beetle for sheep. Do you know, Bob? Yeah.
It's logical that there is.
Yeah, it seems to be a different one because they didn't show up for about 3 years. And now I see lots of dung beetle activity on the sheep manure too. It's just not as hospitable to them as that cow manure. Sometimes on cow manure, as soon as it hits the ground, you'll see the dung beetles fly in. There's dwellers and tunnelers, and the tumblers are the main dung beetles. And then there's rove beetles that look like dung beetles. They're the fast-moving beetles in the dung. Bob covered that, I believe, too. Compacted soil, you don't want to see platy soil, and different soil types will have different structure, but this is a telltale sign that you have compaction. I'm about out of time, so I'm going to speed on through some of these. Lots of forms of grazing management. We try to do them all, and we'll just see what's needed and when, and we'll change it around. I'm going to skip that. I love these Zammer handles. I've gone to all Zammer handles, and then my Cadillac on the reels is a Gallagher turbo wire reel. That along with this, it's the reel I'll grab every time. There's the red clover there in the picture. We like to rest fields different amounts. How many paddocks do you need? I've got 16 permanent paddocks typically, and we'll turn it into 45 paddocks with polywire. More would even be better. That's my common layout when I go to a farm. I want long parallel fields that that triangulate or lead to a corral. Where's the hub on the pasture? The hub in this room is right here because this touches everything. This is a very important spot. Find the hub on your place and work with it. Got lots of uses. It's easy to manage. That's the fellow that I work with, Mike Clark. He's just doing some of the pie-shaped fields around water. It's the most inefficient way to fence, but most of your intensive grazers will fence that way. And then if you're wanting to just allocate forage, you can do the no back fence and work your way away from water. Gate arrangement, I do this real commonly, have gates that don't have a post in the center, but you can send cattle every which way. That works really well. That's just if you had water. I'll use 8 gates around the water. You could just get by with 4, but time you do the welded wire and the boards and more posts, you could have bought another cheap gate, So that's a little different than the one I just showed, but that's another way of doing it. Total access to the water. If you're just putting in 2 gates, put them across from each other. That way you can send animals different directions. If they're hung on the same side, you can't do much with that. Cost of moving hay versus moving the cattle. It costs 2 times to move the hay versus just moving the cattle. Watch that rumen feel. What am I got here? Maximum stocking rate. If it's a 3-ton yield, it's about 2.5 acres per animal unit. I don't care if it's cut for hay or it's grazed, because that's assuming 70% utilization. Utilization isn't as important as I once thought because I want a lot returning to the ground. This is just a before picture and an after picture. That's 100,000 pounds per acre. Anytime you're above 70,000 pounds, you're probably going to need to rotate more often than once a day. That's an after picture. Takeaway thoughts, I guess I need to slow down here, is attempt to manage your existing vegetation, what you have. Just manage what you have, and then maintain cover on all the pastures. Now that's pictured there, that's rescue grass. It's like Matua brome grass. Incredible quality. It grows in high manure areas. Feeding the hay, let's feed on those low fertility or weedy areas. Let's tromp the undesirable forage. Not forage, but weeds and all. Inventory the forage needs about a month prior to the normal seeding dates. If you do that, you can prepare for what's coming next. So always be thinking it season to season. I try to carry seed in the truck. I almost always will have annual ryegrass or crabgrass in my truck because those 2 are easy to seed, and I want to cover that. If you need to confine the animals, then let's feed on an area, and then if you're confining them too often, you could manage as a feedlot. But don't turn the pastures into feedlot. There's good feedlot management, and you can do that, but don't turn the whole farm into it. Regenerative ag is managing everything. It's all connected, the soil, plants, animals, the whole. And resiliency results in assured production even in hard times. That's when this regenerative ag really shines, is when in a drought or in winter we can extend the grazing. All right, so Bob, won't you come back up and any questions, comments from anybody? Yeah, I mean, the human nature is let's get a ripper in there, right? And I've seen a ripper work in some depressions where there was water standing. I can't deny that sometimes will work, but in general, it's going to be with plants. Just get deeper roots, get diversity, not just tap roots like a radish. Bob, you address it.
I agree. You want some deep-rooted plants. The annuals tend to be more aggressive, have a little more energy of penetrating that. So if you can get, let's try to think. Annual ryegrass does a good job.
I want to add to the annual ryegrass. There's some new research in University of Kentucky did, and they are impacting the fragipan. They're getting their soil to be an inch deeper per year. And fragipans, Bob's the soil scientist, we thought there was nothing that would get a fragipan. You could rip it, it'd just go back together. But those roots are breaking down that pan as much as an inch a year. That if you've got fragipan soils or compacted soils and it's pretty bad, then I would go with annual ryegrass.
I've always used annual ryegrass, like where it got all cramped up in the winter.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you have to even hit it with a disc a little bit or something but boy, it comes right on.
Yeah, I'll tell people they'll think they found heaven, and then come June they'll say, "Oh hell, what did I do?"
It doesn't last long, but it's very aggressive. So those heavy use areas or disturbed areas, it's a good quick cover. It helps you build soil stability quickly.
That's the most, not expensive either.
Yes.
Right.
I have individuals, cow-calf guys, that lock their cows and calves on a sacrifice area in the winter and feed hay and then in the spring they'll come back and use annual ryegrass over that area to get it reestablished into a cover.
Just seed something on that
Yes.
area. It's just a waste to just let it go up in pigweed or spiny amaranth. There's so
Yes.
many nutrients there that we need
It's
to
lost.
capture, and you're just going to get weeds if you don't sow those areas.
How do you handle drought?
How do we handle drought?
Open all the gates?
That's the time to close them down. And I don't
Yes.
criticize anybody for feeding hay. I want you to feed hay to protect those grazing heights.
Yes.
Drought management, the warm seasons like you had. And Bob, I had a question for you on your Sudan grass, I believe it was, or was it pearl millet?
Sudan grass I use
Yeah,
more.
so
Sorghum
are you
Sudan grass.
using a burn down to plant that, or are you
No.
just planting it right in the?
We use the animals. So my warm season annuals, I interseed into existing pasture fields. So it's another way of my methods of, I usually go to the fields that have the highest toxic fescue levels. We'll graze them real hard in April, and as soon as they get back we do what you don't supposed to do, and
Yeah.
graze it real hard again and set those plants back. Then we'll come back. I usually try to plant my warm season annuals the first part of May. I want to get them in the ground when we still have moisture. But it's a competition. If it gets cold again, which it can, then the cool seasons come back and outcompete my warm seasons. So you got to look at the long-term weather forecast to make that system. But yes, if it's too cold, they won't germinate, and the cool seasons come back and overtop them.
Do you do any burning or clipping of your pastures, or do you just simply rotate the
I do. I used to not clip much, but now I clip more. I have a problem with wing stem. Just because you have sheep and goats and cattle, you're still going to have a few weeds they don't like. Perilla mint, I have a problem with if I don't keep enough cover on the ground. It germinates in April. I can see it coming. Another one is nimblewheel. It's a native grass, but it's undesirable. They'll eat it some, but it's not a high producer. And if I graze too close, I'll get a lot of nimblewheel. Sheep, and Bob, you tell me your experience, they're better selective grazers. I think nimblewheel increases more where there's just sheep pastures. That's been my experience dealing with other producers. So maintaining that height is real important. But the clipping thing, it's partly to keep it vegetative, but it's mainly for weed control.
What time of year?
Well, you know, if it didn't cost, I would probably clip after every graze where there was weeds. But,
I call that pruning.
yeah, and I like to go ahead and clip a little lower. I don't leave it real high. I think if you're going to clip, you know, if it's weed control you're after, then let's go ahead and go down to 5 inches. Yeah. But if I had one time a year to clip, it would be like August.
So I'm cutting back on my clipping. My
And we
stands.
vary it. I mean, year to year, it's a different decision.
So I'm probably only clipping 20% of my pasture fields now. At any one, it's never the same 20%. We'll make that decision usually in May and come back. But my tall weeds are becoming fewer and fewer. And like I said, I use the cows to come in and to manage more and more of the seed heads. I've learned how to do that. By accident, I think. It wasn't a planned thing. But I saw what they were doing, and it's so easy. The sheep don't handle seed heads. So what we do, I don't run my sheep and cattle together. I've never been able to do that. Maybe I haven't tried hard enough. When I have put them together, they stay separate anyway, and they just won't commingle. So then they end up grazing the paddock 2 separate ways. They claim their territory, and the cows won't go over and graze where the sheep were, and the sheep won't go over where the cows are.
Ours do segregate, but they're just doing this.
They're
Yeah.
mingling around.
Yeah, yeah.
So what I've done, I've switched the farm. So the sheep will graze these paddocks half the year, then the cattle come over and graze where the sheep were, and the sheep go over and graze where the cattle are. So that's how we've managed it. So for me, like I said, I'm a shepherd, so the cows came to the sheep farm to manage parasites. That was their purpose. But more of you eat beef than lamb, so I can sell more beef than I do lamb,
And that's why our ratios are what they are, not just the vegetation, but what we sell. So we sell cuts, so we sell more beef than we do lamb. But lamb's going up.
You don't even do prescribed burns.
I don't hear well, Bob.
prescribed burns.
Oh.
I do some prescribed burns on those patches of warm seasons. I've not done the big field. Well, I won't say not. I haven't done it in 10 years. We've done patch burning, more so. Do you have any warm season stands?
Well, I do, but it's all in CREP right now.
Yeah.
I've got 200 acres of pasture that's in a set-aside program, and it's coming out October of 2023, and I plan to start doing a little burning in preparation for that. But yeah, we don't burn the fescue though, orchard grass.
So I think they're starting lunch if you need to get away, or if not, Charlie?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let's give these guys a hand. They really are.
Well,